Hello aviators! A few days ago I bought a brand new RTX 5060 Ti 16GB to relieve my previous RTX 3060 off duty. I used it for over 2.5 years and now it belongs to the kids' computer. I've been playing in 1440p and it was okay-ish, but now RTX 5060 Ti allows me to play with much higher settings and DCS looks much better. And I want to share this experience here and there sprinkled with some numbers. This will not be a review of RTX 5060 Ti, I'm sure you can find plenty on the internet, and also this will not be a discussion of its value. I'll only talk about my situation and the value for myself. In Europe, we got lucky to get at least some units for 460 euros, which is as close to the MSRP of $430 as any card got in years. So after watching a lukewarm review on Hardware Unboxed, I desperately checked our local store, and when I saw the price, I bought without hesitation. Upgrading from RTX 3060 12GB should give me around 70% more FPS. 2 generations and half a tier higher, this is not what I expected for my next upgrade. Originally I wanted to wait a bit longer, but this value proposition in the current climate convinced me to my own surprise. It goes without saying I'm talking about the 16GB version of the card. Don't even think about an 8GB card for DCS and expect good visuals. Even with this card you can expect some textures loading a bit longer, especially the fancy ones like this fictional Chrome Cat, but I guess that's not much about the GPU alone, so I'm not bothered by that at all. I generally play with a 60 FPS cap and VSync on, because I've got an Office 1440p monitor with just 60Hz. For me it's good enough, I don't need more from DCS. What I didn't like with the RTX 3060 was how noisy it got even with compromised settings. What I wanted for my next card is to handle DCS with more ease, deliver 60 FPS even on the maps like Marianas, all the time or at least most of the time, and not sound like an airliner during takeoff. 5060 Ti delivered this, and I could also up some settings quite generously. While I used quite high textures already previously, I definitely pushed some shadows quality, then visibility range, and also clouds. I don't care much about those reflection stuff. I think DCS has quite good reflections also without this. What else? There's not much cinematic settings, it's not what I want, but I wanted details. So there are these 4 sliders. You can actually change them also during the game and experiment and immediately see the change in the FPS. So we will see that later. And this is the VSync I mentioned already. You might wonder why I don't have full screen checked, but that's to be able to see the game on the first monitor even when I'm focused in another application like a browser on the secondary monitor. Now let's look at a few performance examples on various maps. I'll pause the gameplay. There is little if any noticeable difference when it comes to GPU performance, and it makes looking around much easier. Starting with the Persian Gulf, it's a less demanding map, but we will be over Dubai City with plenty of objects inside. I also added some planes in the mission, but most of the load is caused by the Dubai City itself, and we're heading straight towards it. The GPU, as you can see, is not slacking off, but it's still very quiet. That's another thing I like about this card. It has 3 fans instead of 2, and perhaps also because it's a new card, less dust and everything, it's much quieter. Obviously, I'm totally ignoring my CPU for this whole pseudo review. It's a rusty Ryzen 7 3700X. It may be a limiting factor here and there, but it never gets more load than the GPU, so we can safely ignore it, I guess. Sometimes I can see some minor artifacts when moving around or moving the view. It's not visible when the view is totally stopped. It can be caused by DLSS, but I will not compare it with other technologies when it comes to visual quality, because I will play with DLSS for better performance. And at the end of the video I will compare how much better DLSS is with 5060 Ti compared to the previous 3060. Let's look at some ground operations here. I didn't overdo it with models, but it's not a single plane. You can see that there are quite a few planes with some details, and the GPU card is kind of bored, not even turning the fans, which is great, I like it. Here my whole system takes around 230 watts with 2 monitors and all the controllers, everything, so it's pretty power efficient gaming. Next, let's check the much more detailed Normandy 2 over Paris. During my tests I noticed a few themes here. The first one The FPS go below 60 when the plane is very low, which I'll demonstrate soon. Here we are in some 250 meters AGL and 60 frames per second is no problem, even over Paris with all the buildings. The other theme is rather obvious. With roughly the same view from the cockpit, the GPU has to work harder because of the cockpit, especially with the mirrors on. FPS here is still 60, but the card uses more power. Now let's dive to fly just above the buildings. FPS go down, and considering there are mostly buildings in the view, the main culprit here is this scenery detail factor slider. You can see the effect especially when it's very low. You can perhaps experiment with position from the middle up, but that causes more obvious detail pop-ins closer to the view. But otherwise, Normandy map works fine even over very detailed areas. Before I compare DLSS with other options, I'd like to show you how much better DLSS is compared to the one with the RTX 3060. I don't have any flyby cams from before the upgrade, where you would see ghosting in the form of a trail behind the plane. With 5060 Ti you can barely see some trail of some elements, for instance position lights. So the problem is not completely gone, but it's not nearly as disruptive and disturbing as it was with 3060. But I've got this old video of ghosting in Yak 52, where levers and gauge needles became very blurry. And also the stick and its patterned surface was very annoying to watch. The video is not of great quality, but it captures the problem faithfully. Now in the same cockpit with roughly the same zoom out, because that makes it more pronounced, you barely see any problem. The levers move smoothly and the gauges, maybe there's a little bit of blur again, but it's not nearly as bad. And also with the knobs, you can clearly see which way they are turning. I already knew from 3060 that DLSS takes less power. Of course the quality has to be acceptable to use it, which it wasn't on 3060. But I was curious, how do various upscaling and anti-aliasing technologies compare on my system with 5060 Ti? I'll compare DLSS, DLAA, MSAA and no AA at all, otherwise with the same settings. I'll active pause F4 a few seconds after the start of the instant action mission for landing on Marianas. There will be no VSync and FPS cap for these tests, so you will see the maximum possible FPS on my system, that is. And I'll provide average and 1% low FPS numbers with and without mirrors. As a side note, 1% low were just a few frames lower than average FPS, unless my system was doing something unexpected, so you can actually just ignore them as well. With the DLSS quality setting, I got 60 frames per second with mirrors and 78 without. What you see right now on the video is OBS recording that shaves a few FPS from the numbers without recording, but it's not that bad. This is also a benefit of a better card with better encoders compared to 3060. I put all the numbers on the screen for your benefit, so as you can see DLSS balanced is 61 frames per second and without mirrors 80 frames per second, so you can see that it's a minimal performance boost from DLSS quality. DLAA only was 55 with mirrors and 69 without mirrors. MSAA 2X is 55 with mirrors and 71 without mirrors, so very similar numbers to DLAA only, but the image is less stable around the edges. That's strange. MSAA 4X 51 with mirrors and 66 without mirrors. The image was better than MSAA 2X, but still not stable around the edges. For me, MSAA is not useful anymore. Perhaps it's better for screenshots, but definitely not for gaming. Finally, no anti-aliasing, 58 frames per second with mirrors and 76 without mirrors. Again, the image was unstable around the edges. In the end, this might be caused by the scene itself, the shaken F4 cockpit, but I prefer the edges with DLSS much better. I also tried the same mission with the L39 Albatros instead of the Phantom, just to see the impact of a different cockpit, because reportedly the F4E is a bit more demanding. There may also be a difference in mirrors, because F4E has 3 mirrors while L39 only 1. Also, mind you, this footage is not from the actual test. Here I have a 60 FPS cap, but you can see how much the GPU numbers change when I've switched the mirrors on and off. The numbers are a bit different as I tweaked some settings in the meantime, so we only compare these two datasets. In the original Phantom mission I got 66 FPS with mirrors and 86 without mirrors, and in L39C version it was 77 with mirrors and with no mirrors 99. That's 16% more FPS for L39 with mirrors and 11% more without them. So there is an obvious performance impact with the more complex cockpit, which is to be expected, but it's nothing extreme, it's not like 2-to-1 or something. So let's summarize my various personal performance versus settings observations. Of course, the numbers are specific to this setup, so be careful when generalizing them. Flying very low over dense tree areas, forest detail factor is the biggest FPS influencer, sometimes making a difference between 60 and 40 FPS. But the performance degradation kicks in quite quickly with the slider, and without it the trees looks horrible. When going higher, even 100 meters or so, the performance degradation is less noticeable. It seems this slider takes most of the performance for the improvement of the closest trees, and this makes all the difference when flying low. As a regular helicopter pilot, I decided to leave it maxed for my pleasure. Don't compromise on the forest visibility, it really is better to max this out and lower the details factor instead, if you have to. Over cities, again, mostly very low, the scenery detail factor can help. But similar to the forest details, you'll lose graphics quality faster than gain more frames. This factor also influences zoomed-in views. You can clearly see the difference in this example. I tried both DLSS quality and DLSS balanced, and we've seen it before, the effect on FPS was negligible, in my case at least, so I left it in the quality setting. DLSS gives me a bit more FPS than no anti-aliasing, but because it includes DLAA, I prefer the picture much more. DLAA alone, without upscaling, only is around 10% slower, similar to MSAA 2x, and MSAA 4x is slower again. For whatever reason, MSAA didn't look so great, in the shaking cockpit at least, with blinking artifacts around the edges. Previously I considered MSAA 4x the best quality anti-aliasing, but with my current setup it's not true anymore. For me, I don't need to push the maximum from my card in DCS. I want my GPU to handle most of my playing gracefully with 60 FPS in 1440p. The RTX 5060 Ti does that, no problem on Marianas or elsewhere. If it goes under 60 in more demanding situations, I don't care that much. I will not lower the settings for that, because I want DCS to look nice. And as a bonus, the new GPU does this quietly. Also with the 5060 Ti, the DLSS looks much better than DLAA only on the 3060, and this gives me around 10% more FPS for free. In the future I may tone down some of the visuals to get more reliable 60 FPS in more situations, but unless I see 40 FPS way too often, I'd rather have a nicer DCS with less pop-ins of textures and objects. I'll see in the future what newer planes and especially new maps will require, of course. I can't stress enough, this video is not a recommendation to buy the card, and even if it only applies with a good price for that 16GB model, don't even think about 8GB. If AMD offers a better value in your region, go for it. I was seriously considering RX 9070 or 9070 XT, but the current pricing in Slovakia makes it worse value per FPS, mind you. Not to mention that with NVIDIA you will also get better productivity support, for instance OBS recording and DaVinci Resolve video editing. So in the end I'm extremely excited about this upgrade, much more than I expected, because originally I planned to upgrade to a card twice the powerful, something like that, which is not the case of course with 5060 Ti versus 3060. All my excitement is based on the price I paid for it, of course, so if it's overpriced, again, just don't buy it. And also whether it's good for you, because if you need some 4K or high-res VR, then 5060 will not do it for you. So perhaps my main point is, can RTX 5060 Ti 16GB give you a great DCS experience with a lot of details, DCS that looks really good in 1440p with a more or less stable 60 FPS? Yes, it can. I have no bias remorse at this moment, and I know very well what bias remorse with NVIDIA cards is, trust me. This may change with the future GPU generations, but for now I'm happy. And now for the rest of the video I will leave you with more low-level footage from the great new Germany map, because the map really deserves it. And with that, fly safe and see you later.